Men women of Reddit who went out to buy cigarettes milk and never came back. Do you ever think about the family you left behind? Do you send them money or regret leaving? What made you go? My grandfather, who I have never met, walked out on my dad. I never really knew anything about him other than he lived in Florida and chose favorites to the extreme. My dad has 9 brothers and sisters he left behind with my amazing grandmother Rose, who I call my grandfather, is another amazing person named Jim. Jim worked at a casket company and listened to my grandmother's story one day at a bake shop, I think. After hearing it, he would send check after check to my grandmother offering help, which my grandmother would never cash and just let build up. When he realized he wasn't losing any money from his bank account, he showed up at my grandmother's doorstep with another check and talked to her. He lived with her after that until the day she sadly died. Jim is 90 years old and still kicking. I love that man more than I can express in words. I'm just looking around this thread to see if my dad's here, because I'd really like to hear his explanation. Whilst my parents divorced when I was 4, and possibly one of my earliest memories was my dad and his guitar case walking out of the first home I knew. This story is someone else's. I did a 6-month stint as a credit debit card call center goon leading up to the end of last year. I enjoyed it, and as much of a cynical prick I may be, I love helping people. This particular one will stay with me forever. A woman called up asking to update her title. It was listed as Mrs. and she informed me that she'd been divorced some time ago. I offered my condolences and she stuttered somewhat, but thanked me, saying it was for the best. After a little bit of conversing, she ended up spilling her guts to me and explained that her husband had just up and ditched her and their son on freaking Christmas Eve. Just up and left without a word. After 20-ish years of marriage, she was struggling and her son was acting out heaps. She'd done some digging and he was in Southeast Asia banging 20-year-olds and getting fricked up or something. After revealing this to her son, he started acting out, and I related to this. Kinda hit home, and I said that from my experience he was 20, and I was the result of my dad walking, that the rebellion is anger, and not to hate him for it, just support and love and give him the option of contact with his father, and so on and so forth. She was in tears by the end, apologizing profusely for going on a tangent and that it probably wasn't my job to deal with her crap. To which I replied, "You're a person before you're a customer, and sometimes we all just need someone to listen." She felt a lot better and went on her way, but ended the conversation saying she wished she'd never searched for her ex, as the truth hurt more than not knowing. People leave because of many reasons. Let them, lest you end up hurting yourself more. My mother went on a trip when I was 7. I remember asking my dad often when she was coming back. She got back in touch a few years after that, but it still hurt having to learn that she lied to me. I still don't have many good feelings about her. It's probably because I never really knew how to trust her after that. She still believes that she can have a big say in my life even after she left, even though she never helps my father with any bills. Why did she leave? I was the one who left. My mother wasn't the world's worst, but the drugs were starting to become a major issue. My father had already left, and we saw him about once every couple months. My mom always had a new boyfriend, and it wasn't a good one. I was growing very sick of the situation, and I knew that I had to get out of it. The only problem was that my little sister was stuck in the same boat. I was 11 and she was 3. In the middle of the night, I grabbed my little sister, a backpack of clothes for both of us, and my bicycle. I rode until I reached my grandma's house. It wasn't too far, about 25 miles. It felt like it took forever. My grandma took us in, and that's where we stayed. It's not that we didn't have my grandma before, but my mom had always refused to get treatment and accept help. My grandma would offer, mom would get angry, and we'd be back out the door. This time was different. My grandma changed the locks in the morning. My mom was too hopped up on drugs and didn't wake up until around noon. Plenty of time to get things done. My grandma set up a bedroom for both of us, and when my mom finally woke that morning, she broke down. It was like she finally realized that something had to change. She finally entered treatment. Fast forward 18 years. My wonderful grandparents have passed away, but I have a respectable relationship with my mom. She's clean and runs her own cleaning business that makes ends meet. She just received her GED. My little sister is a semester away from graduating college, and she was the second person in my family to ever graduate high school. I was the first. I got an athletic scholarship and went on to college. 2 master's degrees, a great job, brand new house, and 2 awesome dogs later. I'm the happiest guy in the world. I am a teacher, and my experience has led my success. I share pieces of it with my students, behavioral disorders, to let them know that everyone has a chance. Sometimes you just have to take it. My grandfather went out while my grandmother was in labor and never came back. She sent the cops looking for him and everything, and when they went to her house he had left a note saying he got his secretary pregnant and he was leaving. He left her with no money, 4 kids, and having never worked in her life. My dad was the one she was giving birth to. He never met his father until he was called to my grandfather's deathbed a few years ago. We walked in and he saw us. His face changes expressions from plain to absolute terror. He began sobbing. How could he know it was his son, you ask? Because they looked like freaking identical twins. He barely sobbed out the words, "You look just like me." He tried to say "I'm sorry," but my dad interrupted saying, "I forgive you." This sounds like a scene from a movie, but it is the most precious memory I have of my dad. I have never seen my dad the same way again. He's my personal hero. How could he just forgive him? My dad never had a Christmas because of how poor they were. He did Boy Scout alone. I just don't know how he forgave him. I don't get it. I didn't just take off and leave. We both knew I was heading to another state to live for the remainder of our son's life. I set up child support before I left, and have had my son every summer since I left. I decided to leave because I was too immature to raise him to be a functioning member of society. I fricked my life up before he was even born, and I didn't want him to follow me down that path. 16 years later he now has a stable life with a brother and a sister that he cares a lot about. I'm very proud of everything they have accomplished. I took the easy way out and just ran away. Someday I'll sit him down and explain everything, but it might be too late. I will give you credit for flat out owning up to what you've done, taking some custodial duties and financial responsibilities. Actually, your story isn't that bad, and I was expecting worse overall coming into the thread. My father moved out when I was 7. He was going to visit his sick father, which might have been partially true, as my grandfather on his side was sick and ended up passing away around that time. I was just really confused why my mother was crying when he said he was going to visit my grandpa. I found out why when he didn't come back. Last time I heard from him, he'd called me on my 9th birthday to tell me he wasn't going to pick me up that Friday weekends at his place, because he was going to find a new house to live in and didn't want to bore me with paperwork. Anyways, I never heard from him again. I wanted to comment because something actually happened regarding my father around 2 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, a co-worker at my restaurant pulled me aside and told me he saw a guy with my last name who looked like me. My co-worker said he'd asked the guy if he had a son named Ahada Style, and the man said he did, but he hadn't seen him in a long time. I kinda blew it off as coincidence, but 2 weeks ago the co-worker pulled me aside again and said the same guy came back with a business card, asking to give the card to me. Since he knew my co-worker worked with me, it was him. So, now I have my father's cell number, work address, work numbers, and email. Not really sure if I'm going to call or email or not. He has the same handwriting as me. I know I don't quite fit the category OP posted about, but that's my story. This will probably get buried, but I've been wanting to post this for years now and have never really found an appropriate place, or one I thought would help. My cousin from an extended part of my family decided to disappear. At least, that's what my family tells me. In the late 90s and zeros I spent a lot of time with him and his family in Greenville, SC. They would also come up to NC to visit us. I would like to think I was the closest person to him from the NC side of the family. He is 1 year older than me and should be turning 25 or so soon. All was fine until his mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. She fought for years and was as hard-nosed a fighter I've ever seen. During this fight, His dad was diagnosed with lung cancer and died relatively soon afterwards. Eventually his mother passed away as well, and my cousin was essentially on his own. My side of the family tried to keep in touch, and they thought of all people I'd be the one he'd reach out to. I haven't heard from him since 2009, when I believe he was selling real estate in SC. I've tried all social media to find him, calls etc. I'm fairly certain he just wanted to disappear. It worries me though, because what if that wasn't the case? I mean, I can definitely see that being his personality, but you never know. I know I've gone on a little rant here, but I knew him and his friends pretty well, and I know they're the type of people who are on Reddit. Surely one of them, and maybe even my cousin, will see this and know with certainty who I am talking about. Chris, you don't have to get in touch or even have a friend let me know you're alright. I just wanted to let you know I've not forgotten about you and I miss you, man. My mother was a prostitute, alcoholic, and addicted to drugs. She left when I was 3 and never came back. My father would tell me that she loved me very much but just wasn't ready or mature enough to have a child. He passed away when I was 16. When that happened, I was able to get in contact with my mother's sister, an aunt to me. She would hang out with me, but when I asked around my mother, she would beat around the bush and say that my mom didn't want me to see her the way she was. I hoped to graduate college and then see my mother, to show her that I did good and be able to talk to her as an adult. But she died right before I turned 22, so I never got to ask her why. But it's easy enough to assume that when the party lifestyle has its hooks in you, those hooks are deep indeed and never really let go. I hope to graduate college and then see my mother, to show her that I did good and be able to talk to her as an adult. You did good, and don't need anyone else's validation to know that. You seem to have a pretty good head on your shoulders. I knew of my mother until the age of around 11. Last time I saw her was 2007 when she came back to my hometown and we drove around. I don't remember anything of the conversation as I was only a young lad then, although I do remember one question. She asked if I loved her or my dad more. A simple enough question. Anyone could answer it. Then the harshness of the situation hit me. Silence. I'd just been asked if I wanted to live with mummy or daddy and never, I repeat, never see the other parent again. I only realize this now, years later, the gravity of that decision. My entire life decided by a simple, 3-letter word. Dad. Best freaking decision. I still am unsure about the reasons she walked out. I've been told it was to avoid her financial situation. She apparently owes my father a little more than £1,000 and a few companies far more. I'd say never knowing a parent is far easier than knowing a parent briefly and never understanding why they left until you're old enough to get a possible answer that might be untrue as it's biased towards the other parent. I don't miss her. I have a nice life where I've just started and now dropping out of university. A loving family as my dad found a wonderful woman and even stepbrothers. So yeah, middle finger to the bee who spawned me. My dad walked out on my family when I was about 4. He left us for a woman he'd been sleeping with to get him. I grew up hearing constant fighting in my house, but I remember that day. My mother sounded more terrified and desperate than I'd ever heard her before. I was sitting behind a chair in the living room, and I remember not liking how cold it was, slamming doors, screaming. They came out and my dad just said he was leaving. I ran to him because I wanted to go too. He literally shut the door in my face and left. I remember the worst part about it was my mom sitting on the floor sobbing. I sat on her lap and told her, "It'll be okay, mommy. I love you. I seriously have always wanted to just shut that memory out. Bleh." My grandfather left my dad and his family on my dad's first birthday, so now my dad hates his birthday, and his family kind of hates him because they feel like it was his fault or something. My dad ended up getting an awesome stepdad and kept some contact with his biological dad. Both of them died within a few months of each other a few years ago. There was no funeral for my biological grandfather. My dad wasn't sad at all. When his stepdad died though, he gave the eulogy and it's the only time I've ever seen my dad cry. You've been visited by Professor Papa. You'll ace all your classes this year only if you comment study hard, Papa. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check out another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day, you magnificent people.